Hey there! Welcome back to our channel. This is Princess, and in today's video, we will be creating a number guessing game using JavaScript. So the game is quite simple. The computer will generate a random number between a specified range, and our task is to guess that number correctly within a certain number of attempts. And after each guess that we make, it will compare our guess to the generated number and will provide a feedback. So it will tell us if our guess was too high, too low, or we got it right. So based on the feedback, we can adjust our subsequent guesses and try to reach the correct answer within the fewest attempts possible. It's a game of logic and it will test your guessing skills. We will also build it step by step. And this game is not only fun to play, but it is also a great opportunity for you to learn and practice the basics of JavaScript programming. Okay, so let's get started. So first, let's create a folder in your directory to organize our files. I think for me, I'll just create a folder on the desktop and name it number guessing game. There. So it's important to keep all our code in one folder for it to work properly. Next, let's open our preferred code editor. In my case, I'll be using Visual Studio Code. If you don't have a Visual Studio Code installed in your computer, you can find the download link in the description box below. Alternatively, you can use any code editor of your choice. So let's open the folder that we just created a while ago. Okay, desktop. Okay, so now that we're here inside our folder that we just created a while ago, we can now start building our game. So we will begin by creating the HTML structure for our game. The HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is the foundation of any web page. So think of a car. Imagine HTML as the car's frame and body. Like its framework, it provides the basic structure of a car. So the HTML defines the structure and content of a web page. So let's create a new file here and name it index.html. So we will start by setting up the basic structure of our page. Let's have the HTML tag there to represent the root of an HTML document. It is a container for all other HTML elements. Next is the head tag. So the head tag provides the general information about the document. We can use this to add a title to the web page, external links that we will use in our web page, and to find more information about the HTML document. So for now, let's add a title. Let's put here number guessing game using JavaScript. So there, they specify the titles of a web page. So for example, when someone visits your page, the title tag is displayed at the top of their web browser window and acts as their placeholder. Okay, next, we will add the body tag. So the body tag is used to define the main contents present inside an HTML page. Okay, now that we have its basic structure, let's now add some elements inside the body. So let's begin with a div element that has a class attribute set to card. Okay, so this will serve as the container for the entire game. It will hold all the elements related to the game. Okay, now let's have an h1 element to display the title of our game. So number guessing game. So this heading will provide a clear indication to the user about the purpose of this page. Okay, below this heading or below the title, let's have a paragraph or the P element. This will contain the instruction, or in this case, let's add a message informing the player that the game or the computer is thinking of a number between, let's say, 1 and 50. So it will also ask the player to guess the number. So let's put here, I am thinking between, set it to 50. Let's also add a break tag here to create a new line. So there. Now let's add another div element with the class attribute of answer. Say answer. So this div will act as a container for the input field and the submit button. Okay, so inside this answer div, let's create the input element with the type attribute set to text, and then an ID, say user input, and a placeholder. This creates a text input field where the player can enter their guess. The input field has an ID attribute set to user input, and then the placeholder attribute will provide a hint to the user indicating that they should enter a number. Okay, and then right next to the input field, let's add a button. So this button element will represent the submit action for the player's guess. Let's also add here an ID attribute. Let's set it to btn for button. Okay, now let's move on to the last line of the code. Here, let's add another p element, and then this time let's set its ID attribute to result. So this paragraph will serve as a placeholder to display the result of the player's guess. Okay, now let's take a look at how it is displayed in our browser. Don't forget to save this file, Ctrl S for me. Okay, let's see how it is displayed in our browser. So there, with our HTML structure in place, it's time to make our game visually appealing using CSS. So the CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, allows us to apply styles and layouts to our HTML elements. So let's go back to our example, the car. The CSS is like the car's exterior, its paint and design, something that adds up to a car's aesthetic appeal. So the CSS provides us with the flexibility to customize the look and feel of our game. So you guys feel free to get creative with the styling. And we can add our CSS by creating a new file right here at the leftmost part of our VS Code, and then name it style.css. Okay, so since we are using an external CSS, let's connect it to our HTML by going to our HTML file, and below the title tag, let's add this line to connect our external CSS file. href, the name of your CSS file, style.css. So there, we've added this line right here to connect the external CSS file to our HTML file inside the head section and just below the title tag. Okay, so let's go back to our CSS file, and then let's minimize this tab. So I will start my CSS code with a series of font imports from Google Fonts. So you can check the link in the description box below if you also want to import yours. These imports will bring in different font families that we will use throughout the styling of our game. Okay. Now, for the first part of our CSS, we will target the body element. Here, we'll set the background color to, let's say, burly wood, just to provide a warm tone to the game. And then let's also define a radial gradient background that starts with a dark orange color and fades into a lighter shade. So I used a gradient generator for this line. You can also check the link in the description box below. Okay. Next, we'll add some styling for the H1. Okay, so the H1 element represents the game's title. So let's center align the text. And then add some padding just to create some space around the title. And then let's set a background color. Let's say I want to use this. And then since we have a dark background color, let's set its color to this one. Okay, now the text is visible. Let's also set the font to 50, font weight 500, and then letter spacing, say 1 pixel. Additionally, let's use this for font family, giving the title a bold and playful appearance. Okay, so this is one of the imports a while ago from Google Fonts. Now let's target the paragraph or the P element in our game. So this element contains various information and messages displayed to the player. So let's just center align the text and set the font size 20 pixels. Okay. So now let's focus on this one, the card class. So the card class represents the container div for the game. So let's set its width. Let's add some margin. The padding. Now we have here the width max content, which means that it will adjust its width based on its contents. And then we added a margin property to center the container horizontally on the page. And then we also applied some padding to create a spacing around the content and let's give the container round corners using border radius property. Say 50. There you go. Now for us to appreciate it more, let's add a background color. Say this color. Okay, there you go. We added a background color, a semi-transparent beige tone. And let's also add some box shadow. Save. So we added a background color, a semi-transparent beige tone, and then we also added a box shadow to provide us a sense of depth. Finally, let's use this font, which we imported a while ago for the text inside the container. So there. Now let's target the div containing the input field and the submit button, which is the answer class. Let's align the content to the center. And then let's add some margin. There. Now let's add some style for the input element within the answer class. Let's align the text within the input field to center. Then set the font size to 25 pixels. Let's also make it bold. Now let's use again one of our imported fonts as its font family, giving the input field a clean and modern appearance. And then let's also add some padding. And lastly, a border radius to enhance the visual appeal. There, I think it's all good. Now, let's add some style to the input placeholder, which is this one, the enter a number. So the input placeholder selector targets the placeholder text within the input field. That answer, input, and then the placeholder selector. There. Let's align the text to the center. Let's set a smaller font size. 820. And let's make it like that. Now, moving on, let's add some styling to the button element. Okay, so let's define the appearance of the submit button. Let's set the text color to black. Let's define some padding and border properties to create spacing and boundaries around the button. So 18. Let's also change the cursor property to a pointer. So this cursor property changes the appearance of the pointer when hovering over the button. So here, the cursor is currently an arrow. If it hovers over the button, it becomes a pointer. There. Now let's set the font size. The font size and the letter spacing properties are applied to adjust the text appearance. Now let's set the background color to a semi-transparent brown shade. this one. And then let's add a box shadow to create a visual effect. So we can just copy the one that we created a while ago, which is this one. Just copy it right here, there. And then let's add a border radius. Set it to 10. And some margin. Okay, there you go. Finally, let's have a button hover selector. Okay, so this button hover selector targets the button when the mouse pointer hovers over it. So let's modify the background color, say to a darker shade of brown. There, okay. Now let's change the font weight to bold. And let's adjust the text color. And let's also add a letter spacing for improved readability. So there, that's it. We are done styling our number guessing game. So now that we have our HTML and CSS ready, it's time to add the game logic using JavaScript. So the JavaScript is a programming language that enables interactivity and dynamic behavior on our web pages. So remember, we now have the car, its structure, and we already painted it. Now we want to add its engine, the transmission, and other mechanical components for it to work. So just like the car's engine, the JavaScript is the one responsible for our web page's functionalities and will allow the user to play the game. So the first thing to do is create a file and name it script.js. So just like what we did ago, create a new file, script.js, and then there. Then let's connect it again to our HTML file. Let's open our index.html and place it at the bottom before the end of the body tag. Yep. The name of your JS file, and then the closing tag. And then Control S to save. Okay, now let's start creating our JavaScript file. Let's go back to our JavaScript. Let's minimize this tab and then there. So there, now let's start with the declaration of a variable named random number. And let's put here the formula that we will use. Okay, so we'll use this to generate a random number between 0 and 50. So we will use the math.random function to generate a random decimal number. This function is inclusive of 0 but exclusive of 1. This means that the function could generate a 0 but it will never generate a 1. It will always return a number less than 0. Okay? So for this game, we set the random number between 0 and 50 to narrow down the player's options. So the times 50 part, this one, 50 being your maximum number, multiplies that decimal number by 50. And then the math.floor is the one responsible for rounding down the decimal number to the nearest whole number. Also, since the math.random is exclusive of 1, we will add the +1 right here to get the range that we want and assign it to variable random number. So for example, the math.random generated 0.55. Okay, so this is our formula. Say this will be 0.55. Then we will multiply this generated number by 50. So that will be 27.5. Okay. So the math.floor will round down this decimal number, 27.5, to the nearest integer and make it a whole number. It will now be 27. So we generated a random number, which is 27, between 0 and 49. But since we want the range to be 0 to 50, finally we will add the +1 right here to shift the range from 0 to 49 to 0 to 50. So it will now be 28. And then there, we somewhat generated randomly a number between 0 and 50. And now, the 28 will now be stored to a variable called random number. Okay, again, we used the math.random function to generate a random decimal number between 0 and 1. Multiplying this number by 50 gives us a range of 0 to 50, and then the math.floor function is then used to round down the decimal to the nearest integer. Finally, 1 is added to the result to ensure that the generated number falls within the range of 1 to 50. Okay, let's remove this. Next is we will create a variable called result. And then assign it the value of an HTML element that has an ID name as result. So basically in HTML, you can assign each element their unique identifiers or ID to access them. And here, we are just passing from this HTML ID value to store its value here in the JavaScript variable result. So we used the document.getElementById method to find or connect the HTML element with a specified ID. Okay. Now, let's also declare the button variable. So we've assigned it to element with the ID btn, which represents the submit button. Also, in my case, if you've noticed, I just used the same name as their HTML IDs just for me to avoid confusion and for consistency purposes. But you can change this to any variable name that you want. Best is to have a variable name related to what is that element or what that element's function is. Okay? Next, let's declare the variable for the number of attempts. Let's set here 5. Okay, so we initialize it with a value of 5. This variable keeps track of the number of remaining attempts the player has. Okay, next is we will add an event listener. So event listeners are used to listen or detect a specific event or action, such as clicking a button or scrolling down a page or pressing a key. And if it detects that event, a code that responds to that interaction or event will execute or run. So remember, we want our submit guess button to work, right? So this event listener code is the one responsible for making it work. It is specifically listening for the click event. So we have here the button that add event listener. Then we have here click. Okay, there you go. So in this case, when the user clicks this submit guess button right here, the function right here will run. Okay, so inside this event listener function, we will retrieve the user's input from the input field with the ID user input and assign it to the user input variable. The user input there. Let's also convert the user's input from a string to an integer using parse int. So guess, let's name it guess. Okay, so the parse int converts the numeric string value to become an integer value. Basically, this will convert the user's input from a string to a number and store it to the guessed variable. Okay. Moving on, we will create or add our nested if-else statements. Basically, these are the conditions that will check if the user enters a number that matches the random number. So let's have our first if-else here. So the first if statement will check if the guess is a valid number between 1 and 50. So the guess should be a number, and it should be greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 50. Then we will proceed to the next conditions. Assuming this condition is true, the code inside the if block will be executed. So inside the first if block, we will have another if statement that will check if the user's guess is equal to the randomly generated number. So if the condition is true, it means that the player guessed it correctly. It will display in the result paragraph, and then the CSS style are modified to display a success message. Okay, so let's do it. Yes. Okay, so there. So if the number is equal to the random number or has the same value as the random number generated, then it will display this. 1. So the inner.html property allows us to change the text or HTML content inside an HTML element. And then right here where we modify the CSS style, this .style.css text property allows us to modify the style of an HTML element. Okay, now if the guess is greater than the random number, then this code block will run. Let's copy this one and change this. So there, if the guess is greater than the random number, the code inside the else if block will execute. So the player's remaining attempts are decremented and a message indicating that the guess is too high is displayed in the result paragraph. And then we also adjusted the CSS style to display an error message. Okay, so there's a greater than, let's add a less than. Okay, so let's just copy this one. And let's change it to less than. And then this one. Okay, so if the guess is less than the random number, the code inside the second else if block will execute. Same as the code above, the player's remaining attempts are decremented and a message indicating that the guess is too low is displayed in the result paragraph. We also adjusted the CSS styles to display an error. Okay, on the other hand, if the user enters an invalid input or a number outside the range of 1 to 50, we will have our else code right here. Okay, so if none of the conditions are met above, let's say the user entered a number higher than 25, or higher than 50, or entered a letter instead of a number, then the program will run this code block right here, ignoring everything from above. So we only have a display message right here, and then the number of attempts will not be deducted by 1 since it is an invalid input. We also modified the CSS style to indicate that it is an invalid input. Okay, finally, let's have something where the code checks if the number of attempts has reached to 0. So if so, it means that the player has exhausted all their attempts. The game ends and a message revealing the correct random number will be displayed in the result paragraph. We will also adjust the CSS styles to emphasize the end of the game, and let's disable the input field to prevent further input. Okay. Okay, so if the attempts is equal to 0, then we will display the game over and reveal what the random generated number is. And then we will also disable the submit guess button right here, as well as the user input field, since it's the logical thing to do, since the user has used up all of his attempts. Okay, and that's it for our JavaScript code. It handles user input, checks the correctness of the guess, updates the result display, and manages the number of attempts. So with this code, our number guessing game is fully functional. Okay, so there you go. We're done creating our simple number guessing game using JavaScript. Let's go ahead and try it out ourselves. Okay, so here our objective in the number guessing game is to guess the random number generated by the computer. So to do this, we will enter our guess into this input field and we'll click on a submit button to submit our guess. So I'm guessing it's number 12. Okay, oops, that's wrong. Then here you can see the game will then provide a feedback letting us or the player know if the guess is too high or too low. So this will help us narrow down our guesses and eventually find the correct answer or the correct number. Then we will continue to guess until we find the correct number or until we have used all the allowed number of attempts. So let's try again. Let's say 25. Oops, that's too low. I have 3 attempts remaining. What if I put in here 51? Oh, 51. Invalid input. Please enter a number between 1 and 50 because we entered a number higher than the specified range. What if I put here 31? That's too low. What if I put here a letter and some punctuations? It's still invalid input, but let's have a number here. Still invalid input. Let's guess it 49. That's too high. 39. Game over. The number was 45. So I lost. Let's play another one. Say 33. It's too high. 23. That's too high. Then 11. Too high. 6. Still too high. 2. Oh, so the number was 1. Okay, so I lost again. Anyway, yep, so there you go. We've successfully created a number guessing game using JavaScript.